Ever been on a flight that felt, absolutely packed, every single seat taken, and you wonder, how on earth did they know so many people would be flying right then?
Or the opposite, right? When there are hardly any passengers and you're thinking about all those empty seats.
Exactly. It's this really complex puzzle airlines are constantly trying to piece together.
It really is a high-stakes balancing act, you could say.
Yeah.
And behind it all is this incredibly sophisticated world of forecasting and, well, planning capacity.
Which is exactly what we're digging into today.
Right.
We're looking at how Qantas, the big Australian airline, tackles this, how they predict travel demand and plan their capacity.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some really interesting excerpts here from Cognitive Market Research, published back in January 2025. This is a bit of a peek behind the curtain.
So our mission really is to unpack these techniques Qantas uses, how they try to figure out passenger numbers across their whole network.
Yeah, looking at how they match the number of seats they offer with, the actual demand, try not to have empty planes, but also not missing out on bookings.
Right, avoiding those empty legs, but also capturing that revenue when demand is high.
You've probably wondered how airlines decide on flight schedules, what planes to use.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out it's a lot more complex than just looking at last year's sales.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's get into it. The research says Qantas uses sophisticated market research techniques. So not just guesswork, it's based on some serious analysis.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is just how much data they pull together. I mean, think about it. They look closely at their own historical booking patterns. When people book, where they're going, how far in advance. But that's just like the first layer.
Right, so that's their internal stuff.
Yeah.
But they're also looking outwards.
Absolutely. They're watching the bigger market trends, the overall economy. Are people feeling confident enough to spend on travel? Or are they tightening their belts?
Okay, that makes sense. Economic confidence must be a huge factor.
And it goes even wider. They bring in a lot of external data, too. Tourism trends obviously are huge. Are more people visiting Australia? Where are they coming from?
And things like big events, I suppose.
Yes. Major events in different cities that can cause massive spikes in travel. They have to factor that in.
A big sports final or a huge conference, yeah, they could totally change demand for certain routes. And competitors too, right? They must watch them closely.
Oh, definitely. What routes are competitors flying? What are their prices like? What marketing are they doing? It all feeds into the model.
Okay, so they gather all this data. The research mentions advanced predictive analytics. That sounds technical. What does it mean in practice?
It means they're going beyond just simple averages. They're trying to forecast demand for, specific flights, predicting how many people might be on that 7 a.m. Sydney to Melbourne flight on a particular Tuesday in, say, October.
Wow, that's specific. That's incredibly detailed.
It has to be. And that level of detail suggests a big logistical operation behind it all. The research also points out they work really closely with airports and ground services.
Why is that collaboration so important? For capacity management.
Well, think about it. If you get the demand forecast wrong, it's not just about empty seats on the plane.
Ah, yeah.
It affects check-in queues, baggage handling, gate availability, staffing for ground crews, everything. Close coordination means the whole system can hopefully handle the number of passengers smoothly.
That makes total sense. A bottleneck anywhere can mess things up. Okay, so all this data, processing it, analyzing it, this is where the tech comes in, right?
Yeah.
The research really highlights Qantas relying on some cutting-edge stuff.
It does. We're talking machine learning, artificial intelligence, AI, and, big data analytics. These aren't just buzzwords for them. They're the actual engines driving the forecasting.
Okay, machine learning. How does that specifically help here? Break it down a bit.
Well, fundamentally, machine learning algorithms are really good at chewing through those huge data sets we talked about, years of bookings, economic data, competitor prices, you name it.
Right.
They can spot subtle patterns, things a human analyst might miss, patterns in customer behavior, market shifts. They might use things like time series models or even, more complex deep learning stuff to make sense of it all.
So it's like having a superpowered analyst finding hidden connections in the data.
That's a good way to put it. And those patterns they find, they then inform all sorts of decisions, like should we start a new route? How often should we fly the routes we have? Even down to how many business class versus economy seats should be on a particular plane.
Okay, and AI. You mentioned AI too. The research talks about dynamic pricing. Is that where AI fits in?
Yes, very much so. AI systems can monitor those demand forecasts constantly, in real time. If a flight's filling up fast, the AI might nudge the price up.
Uh-huh.
Conversely, if bookings are slow for a flight getting close to departure, it might lower prices to try and fill those seats. It's often using things like reinforcement learning to get better at setting prices over time. It's always trying to find that sweet spot between getting the most revenue and staying competitive.
So that explains why flight prices can seem to jump around when you're searching.
That's a big part of it, yeah. And the research also mentions they pull in real-time data from their own app and booking systems.
Why is that real-time feed so crucial?
It's all about being agile. Customer plans change, booking habits shift. If they see live data diverging from the forecast, they can react quickly, make adjustments on the fly, so to speak.
Okay, so they've got tons of data, fancy tech to analyze it. But the research also stresses the pivotal role of market research itself. How does that broader market understanding fit in?
Well, the analytics give you the numbers, right? Market research helps explain the why behind those numbers. It gives Qantas a deeper feel for those demand drivers, what's happening in regional economies, how are consumer tastes changing, are there shifts in why people travel?
So it's not just predicting how many seats, but understanding the motivation behind the travel itself.
Exactly. And that deeper understanding shapes bigger strategic choices. The research mentions route expansion, for instance, finding new places to fly or spotting underserved market. It also affects fleet management, what kinds of planes will they need in the long run, and even importantly, how they can improve customer service.
Right. If you know your passengers better, you can serve them better.
Yeah.
Makes sense. The research mentions surveys, social media, customer feedback, so it's not all just crunching numbers.
Not at all. That qualitative stuff, the feedback, it's invaluable. It tells them about satisfaction, what people like or don't like, how their brand is perceived. That's critical for staying competitive.
And ultimately, all this research and analysis helps them line up their capacity, the flights, the seats, with the actual demand. Yeah, trying to minimize empty seats and avoid turning people away.
That's the core goal. Having that deep understanding lets them make smarter choices about where to put which planes, how often to fly them. It boosts efficiency, boosts profitability. The research really emphasizes how this strong research base lets Qantas adapt quickly to, those constantly changing market conditions.
Let's get practical. How do they actually do this capacity optimization? What strategies are they using day to day?
Well, a big piece is using these advanced scheduling algorithms. Think of them as super smart computer programs.
Okay.
They take all that forecast, data popularity of routes, seasonality, past trends, and figure out the most efficient way to assign their aircraft across the entire network.
Like a massive, constantly shifting game of Tetris with airplanes.
Yeah, that's not a bad way to think about it. And adding to the complexity, they strategically use a mix of different size planes, wide body and narrow body aircraft.
Explain that a bit more. Why is the plane size so important for optimization?
Sure. Wide bodies, the bigger jets, have more seats. They're typically used for long-haul flights or really popular routes.
Right.
Narrow bodies are smaller, better suited for shorter trips or routes where demand isn't quite as high or consistent. Having this mix lets Qantas match the plane size to the expected demand for each specific route.
So you avoid flying a giant, expensive plane half empty on a less popular route.
Exactly. That's incredibly inefficient. It's smart resource management. The research also brings up partnerships and code-sharing agreements. How do those fit in?
Ah, right. Where you book with Qantas but fly on another airline sometimes?
Precisely. These deals let Qantas offer customers way more destinations than they fly to themselves directly. They essentially share capacity with partner airlines on certain routes.
So it gives passengers more options.
And it lets Qantas meet that demand cost-effectively without having to buy new planes or launch every single route themselves. It's another tool in the optimization toolbox. And as the research points out, all these strategies feed back into and are fed by the continuous demand forecasting. It's a loop.
Now, something that must be huge for Qantas operating in Australia is seasonality. Those big swings in demand between holidays and, well, not holidays. How do they forecast that?
You're absolutely right. Given Australia's tourism seasons and regional differences, that's critical. The research says they have a really thorough data integration process for this, meaning they analyze historical data booking patterns from previous years, the peaks, the troughs, and then they overlay predictable things like school holidays, public holidays, major annual events.
So building a kind of demand calendar based on past patterns and known future dates?
Pretty much. But they also look at global trends, too. tourism trends, business travel trends? Are more international tourists expected during certain months? Is there a big global conference happening in Sydney that'll boost business travel?
And the research gives the example of adding more flights to tourist spots during peak season. Seems obvious, but I guess the trick is knowing exactly how many extra flights.
Exactly right. It's about getting that capacity number just right for the expected demand throughout the year. You don't want to add too many flights and have them empty, but you also don't want to leave money on the table. And you definitely don't want planes sitting idle during the slow periods either.
It sounds incredibly complex. And the research does admit that even with all this, Qantas still faces challenges. What are the big hurdles?
Well, one of the biggest, as the research highlights, is just the unpredictability of, external shocks.
Like what?
Think sudden economic recessions, natural disasters, remember the volcanic ash clouds grounding flights, or geopolitical events that create massive uncertainty. These things can cause huge, sudden shifts in travel demand that are really, really hard to predict accurately.
Yeah, something like a pandemic completely throws any model out the window, doesn't it?
Totally. And then there's that constant balancing act between making money and keeping customers happy. You need seats available at decent prices, but you can't afford too many empty ones.
It's a fine line. The research also mentions business travel being particularly tricky to predict.
It really is. Business travel can swing wildly based on the economy, specific industry fortunes. It doesn't always follow those neat seasonal patterns like leisure travel does.
So with all these uncertainties, how does Qantas try to cope? What strategies do they use?
They're constantly refining their models, tweaking them based on new data and what actually happens. They try to incorporate new data sources whenever they can. And, crucially, they work closely with industry partners, other airlines, tourism bodies, even governments, to get a wider view of potential disruptions or trends.
So it's a constant process of learning and adapting.
Absolutely. Continuous improvement is key. Looking ahead, how does Qantas try to stay effective at this long term?
Good question. What does the research say about ensuring future success?
It points to a few things. First, investing in their people training staff on these advanced analytic tools so they can actually use the insights.
Right, the tools are useless without skilled people.
Exactly. Second, making sure different departments work together: marketing, operations, finance. The forecasts need to align with the airline's overall strategy. It can't just be the data scientists off in a corner.
So breaking down silos.
Pretty much. They also really value customer engagement, using loyalty programs, getting feedback. That real-world input helps refine the predictions. And finally, just staying flexible with capacity and keeping up with technology investment. It's all about sustainable growth in a tough market.
This has been really fascinating. And just to hammer home the real-world benefits, the research included a fast fact from a 2022 report. What did that find?
Yeah, that was interesting. It said airlines using these kinds of demand forecasting tools saw, on average, a 15% improvement in on-time performance
Wow, 15%.
and a 10% reduction in operational costs.
Okay, those are significant numbers.
They really are. It just shows the tangible payoff from getting this data-driven demand planning and capacity management right. It's not just about filling seats. It makes the whole airline run better, more reliably, and more profitably.
A 15% boost in on-time flights, passengers would definitely notice that.
For sure. And saving 10% on costs goes straight to the bottom line.
So wrapping this up, it's clear Qantas uses this really layered approach. It's a mix of deep data dives, advanced tech like AI and machine learning, and smart strategic planning, all working together to figure out who's flying where and when, and making sure the seats are there.
Exactly. And hopefully for everyone listening, understanding this gives you a bit more insight into just how complex the travel industry is and the incredible effort that goes into making sure your flight is ready when you are.
Definitely. So here's something to chew on. Considering all the different factors Qantas juggles, economic, social, even environmental, what do you think is the single hardest part of predicting future travel demand? Or maybe, how could some big, unforeseen global event make these already complex models even trickier? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.